بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, I testify that there is no true God worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is Allah's true slave and messenger. Tonight, on this night of Arafah, the day of Arafah, the night of the 9th of the month of Dhul Hijjah, we will focus upon a subject which is much needed for everyone, and it is a scholarly discussed subject by one of the great scholars of our times. May Allah's mercy be upon him, and he is a Shaykh Rahman bin Nasr As-Sadi rahimahullaah, and this is a small treatise which he wrote, and it is in Arabic, Al-Wasa'il Al-Mufida Lil-Hayat Al-Sa'ida, the useful ways of leading a happy life. Who is this scholar of Islam, rahimahullah ta'ala? The author of this brief and important treatise is the eminent scholar Shaykh Rahman bin Nasr, son of Abdullah As-Sadi, who was born on the 12th of Muharram, the year 1307 after Hijrah, in the town of Unayzah in the province of Qaasim in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He lost both his parents when he was a child, and his mother died when he was 4 years old, and his father when he was 7 years old. He started his studies by memorizing the Quran, which he finished around the age of 12. He then engaged himself in seeking different branches of knowledge from the scholars of his city and those who came to it as visitors. He was very diligent and hard-working in seeking knowledge, and by the age of 23 he was already teaching at the same time as he was studying. Among his famous teachers were Shaykh Ibrahim bin Hamad bin Jasir, Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Karim Al-Shibil, and Shaykh Muhammad Amin Al-Shanqiti, the famous scholar of tafsir, and Shaykh Saleh Ibnul-Uthaymeen, the judge of Unayzah, from whom he studied the fields of principles of fiqh and tawheed, tafsir and Arabic language, and he stayed with him till he died. The Shaykh was very knowledgeable in the fields of fiqh and its principles, and in tawheed and its branches. He was widely read in the various works of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibnul-Qayyim rahimahumullah. He was also well versed in the field of commentary of the Quran, and he wrote a tafsir of the Quran in 8 volumes, which he later summarized in a single volume. And this is one of the excellent tafsirs, contemporary tafsirs in our times. Among his other works are several books on fiqh, commentaries on hadith, and small treatises on fundamental rules regarding different fields of knowledge, a compendium of his legal opinions, fatawa, and a collection of his sermons in 3 volumes. He was quite famous for his noble manners, very humble to both elderly and young. He was indifferent to this world and its glory, not caring for rank, power, or glory. He died on the night of Thursday, the 23rd of Jamada Al-Thaniya, the year 1376 after Hijrah, in his hometown of Unayzah. May Allah have mercy on him and give us the benefit of his works and his knowledge. In his introduction to the book, he said, rahimahullaah, praise belongs to Allah, to whom all praise is due. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is Allah's slave and messenger. May the salah and salam of Allah be upon him, his family and his companions. There is no doubt that the bliss of the heart, its tranquility and happiness, and the absence of grief and worry from it is the goal of every individual. It is the means by which a happy, a blissful and excellent life is achieved. There are means to achieve this, some of which are religious, some are natural, and some are physical. These means are never gathered together except to the believers. These means are never gathered together except to the believers. The non-believers, on the other hand, despite the fact that the earnest endeavors of their philosophers is to lead them to these means, even if they achieve them in certain aspects, they miss the way to them in several other aspects that are more beneficial, more permanent, and better in yielding results. I will mention in this treatise of mine the ways and means to achieve this lofty goal, and that is the guest of every individual. Some people are successful in following these ways and therefore live a good and pure life and enjoy their life. Some woefully fail in following any of them, and they live a wretched and miserable life. Others lie between these two extremes. By the level of their following these means, by that level do they live a good life. And it is Allah that guides to all that is good and wards off all that is evil, and it is His help we seek in this. Chapter 1. The greatest and fundamental means of achieving a good life is Iman, is certain faith and good deeds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states this in Surah An-Nahl, chapter 16, verse 97. قال الله تعالى: من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة وَلَنَجْزِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْرَهُمْ بِأَحْسَنِ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Whoever works righteousness, man or woman, and is a true believer, verily to him will we give a life that is good and pure, and we will give, or we will bestow on such their reward according to the best of their actions, or according to the best of what they used to do. And this is paradise in the hereafter. So Allah the Most High informs and promises whoever joins true belief with good and righteous deeds that He will give him a good and pure life in this world, and a good reward in this world and in the hereafter. The reason behind this is very clear. This is because true believers in Allah who have a sound belief that gives rise to righteous deeds and mends the heart and corrects human behavior and makes good both this world and the hereafter, such a people have the basic elements that guide them in dealing with situations of happiness and joy and situations of anxiety, sorrow and grief. They gratefully accept situations of happiness and joy and are thankful and use them in what is beneficial. When they use them in this manner, they experience additional joy, and they desire the blessings of these things and hope they remain with them, and also yearn for the good reward of those who are thankful to Allah. This feeling and experience brings with it so much good and blessings far greater than the joy that is the primary cause of it. On the other hand, in harmful and unpleasant situations of grief and sorrow, they deal with them by resisting what is resistible and lightening what could be lightened, and they preserve or persevere with a beautiful contentment over what they have no power to resist. By this, they achieve the benefits of earnest struggle and gather experience and inner strength, and earn the reward of patience and perseverance, the greatest or the greatness of which belittles in comparison the distasteful things that befell them. As a result, they end up having, in place of the unpleasant things, joy and good hope and a sincere desire in the favors of Allah and His reward. The Prophet ﷺ beautifully expressed this situation in the Sahih Hadith, where he said in the Hadith reported by Muslim, عجبا لأمر المؤمن إن أمره كله خير إن أصابته سراء شكر فكان خيرا له وإن أصابه ضراء صبر فكان خيرا له وليس ذلك لأحد إلا للمؤمن. The affair of the believer is really wonderful. All his affairs are good. When he is touched by ease and affluence, he is thankful, and that is good for him. And when he is touched by suffering, he is patient, and that is good for him. And this is only for the believer. The Prophet ﷺ informs us in this hadith that the good of the believer and his gains and the excellent benefits of his deeds are multiplied several fold in all the things that befall him, be they pleasant or unpleasant. This is why you see two people afflicted by the same ups and downs of life situations, and they differ so widely in the way they encounter them, in accordance with the level of their iman, their faith and righteous deeds. The one with iman and righteous deeds encounters both good and bad situations with what we mentioned of the thankfulness in good situations and patience in bad ones, plus the other things that go along with them. As a result of this, he experiences a joy and happiness, and grief and sorrow leave him, and he becomes free from misery, anxiety and constriction of the heart, and he lives a good and happy life in this world. The other one, on the other hand, encounters joyful and agreeable situations with insolence, arrogance and rebellion. As a result of this, his behavior deviates, and he becomes just like an animal, encountering his joy with utter greed and a burning anxiety and restlessness. And despite that, his heart is still not at rest. He is restless for several reasons. He is restless out of fear that the good things will vanish, and out of the feeling of anxiety for the struggle to retain them. He is restless out of the burning urge and desire to acquire more, because the human self by its nature knows no limits to what it desires, and he may acquire them and he may not. Even if he acquires them, the restlessness still persists, because the circle will repeat itself on him viciously. And when he is afflicted with unpleasant things, he is worried, full of despair, fearful and sorrowful. Only Allah knows the degree of the wretchedness of the life he is going through, and the mental and psychological sickness associated with it, and the extent of fear that would ultimately lead to more horrible and heinous results. This is because he neither has any hope of getting a reward, nor any patience that will console him and lighten his pains. All this is known from human experience. All this is known from human experience. There are many examples in life which, if you reflect upon even one of them and observe through it human experiences, you will definitely see the wide difference between the true believer who is acting in accordance with his belief and the person who is not like him. This is because the religion of the truth strongly urges commitment, or urges rather contentment with Allah's provision and with whatever He gives His slaves out of His favor and vast generosity. If the believer is afflicted with illness or poverty or similar tribulations that no individual is free from, he is happy and contented because of his certain belief. Contentment and satisfaction with what Allah has decreed for him. His heart does not guess for what has not been destined to him. He looks at people that are less fortunate than him, and he does not look at those who are above him in worldly riches. By this, he might even be happier and more delighted and peaceful than the one who has all his worldly needs met, but has not been gifted with contentment. The opposite is the case of the one who does not act in accordance with Iman, with belief. When he is afflicted with poverty or loses some of his worldly needs, you find him in utter despair and wretchedness. Another example is when fear and disturbing events befall a person. You find the one with sound belief having a firm heart, and he is calm and firmly in control of the situation by making the best use of his faculties of thought, speech and action, as though he has already prepared himself for the event. This type of reaction puts him at ease and strengthens his heart. The reaction of the one without Iman, without faith, on the other hand, is the direct opposite of this. When he encounters fearful situations, his heart trembles and his nerves become tense and his intellect loses its focus. There is nothing inside him except alarm and fear. The outward terror is increased by his inward restlessness, the degree of which is beyond expression. This type of people among mankind, if they don't acquire some of the natural means at the disposal of every human being for dealing with troubles through life experiences, their energy becomes completely sapped and they suffer a nervous breakdown. This is because they lack the Iman, the faith that encourages patience, especially in situations of difficulty and anxiety. It is true that both the good and the bad, and the believer and the one who rejects faith, both share the common human quality of acquired courage as well as the innate ability to deal with dreadful situations and lighten their oppressive effects on the self. But the believer, because of his strong belief, patience and reliance and trust in Allah, and his desire to be rewarded by Allah, excels in having qualities that make him more courageous and soothe more effectively the pangs of terror and the pains of calamity on him. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah An-Nisa in chapter 4 verse 104, إن تكونوا تألمون فإنهم يألمون كما تألمون وترجون من الله ما لا يرجون. If you are suffering hardships, they too are suffering similar hardships, but you hope from Allah that which they hope not. But you have hope from Allah that for which they hope not. In addition to that, the believers receive from Allah His special help, succor and assistance that will drive away the dread and terror that befell them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in Surah Al-Anfal chapter 8 verse 46, وَاصْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ, and be patient. Surely Allah is with those who are patient. Secondly, among the means of eliminating worry, grief and anxiety is goodness to creation. By words, by deeds, and by all types of good acts. All of these are good and excellent in the sight of Allah, and by them Allah removes worries and anxieties from both the good and the bad, each in accordance with his level of being good to creation. Except that the portion of the believer is more complete and perfect, and he also excels by the fact that his goodness is born out of sincerity to Allah and seeking His reward. As a result, Allah makes the act of doing good and granting it easy for him because of his hope in the goodness with Allah. And He removes from him unpleasant things because of his sincerity and his seeking the reward of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nisa in 4:114, لا خير في كثير من نجواهم إلا من أمر بصدقة أو معروف أو إصلاح بين الناس ومن يفعل ذلك ابتغاء مرضات الله فسوف نؤتيه أجرا عظيما. There is no good in most of their secret conferences except in him who exhorts to a deed of charity in Allah's cause, or goodness or conciliation between people. Whoever does that seeking the pleasure of Allah, we shall give him a great reward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us that these things are all acts of goodness, whoever does them. And acts of goodness bring with them good and remove evil. But the true believer who seeks the reward and pleasure of Allah, for him Allah gives an immense reward. Part of that immense reward is the removal of grief, sorrow and anguish. Chapter 2. Among the means of warding off anxieties arising out of nervousness and the preoccupation of the heart with some sorrowful things is occupying oneself with one activity or another, or with some useful knowledge. This is because doing that will distract the heart away from being immersed in its anxieties. It might even make him forget the things that caused him grief and sorrow, and he may even experience some happiness and become cheerful. This is also something that is common between both the believer and the non-believer. But the believer is different, because when he occupies himself with the knowledge that he is seeking or giving, or with good action he is doing, whether it be an act of worship or a worldly act in which he has a good intention of doing it to seek strength in worshipping Allah, when he does that, he does it out of his belief in Allah, sincerity and seeking the pleasure of Allah. And that in itself has the additional effect of warding off grief, worries and anxiety. We have seen many people afflicted with sorrows and permanent anxieties to the extent of making them very ill. Their only cure was to make them forget the cause of their sorrow and misery and be preoccupied with their normal activities. The activity to be preoccupied with should be something pleasing to the self and one that it yearns for. This makes it more effective in achieving the desired goal, and all knowledge is with Allah. Fourthly, among the things that ward off worry and anxiety is to concentrate one's attention and concern oneself with the affairs of the present and to stop being anxious about the future or grieving over the past. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ sought refuge in Allah from anxiety and grief. Grief is usually over past events that you can neither bring back nor rectify. Anxiety is usually fear and concern over what will come in the future. Therefore, a person should be the, quote, son of the moment, end of quote, concentrating his energy and attention in the betterment of his existing events and his present moments. Concentrating attention over the affairs of the moment is the necessary cause of their accomplishment, and it is what gets rid of grief and anxiety from the heart. When the Prophet ﷺ asks something from Allah or guides his ummah to ask a specific thing from Allah, he is exhorting them that together with seeking help from Allah and having hope in his favor, at the same time they have to work hard and earnestly for the accomplishment of what they asked or the removal of what they asked to be removed from them. Therefore, making dua, asking something from Allah, should go side by side with action. So the slave strives for what will benefit him in his religion and in his worldly life, and he asks his Lord to make him accomplish his need, and he seeks his help in that. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, which is reported by Imam Muslim, احرص على ما ينفعك واستعن بالله ولا تعجز وإذا أصابك شيء فلا تقل لو أني فعلت كذا كان كذا وكذا ولكن قل قدر الله وما شاء فعل فإن لو تفتح عمل الشيطان. Strive, the Prophet ﷺ said, strive for what will benefit you and seek the help of Allah, and don't be incapacitated. And if something afflicts you, don't say, if I had done such and such, such and such would have happened, but say, this is the decree of Allah, He does what He wills, this is because if, article if, opens the act of shaitan, of the devil. In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ exhorts us to join between two things. The first is to strive for useful things in all situations and seek the help of Allah, and not to yield and surrender ourselves to incapacity, because that is harmful negligence. The second is to surrender to Allah over past events that have passed and witness in them the decree of Allah and His predestination, His preordainment, pre-decree. We see that the Prophet ﷺ has delineated two categories of affairs. The first category is affairs that the slave has the ability to accomplish totally or partially, or those he can avoid completely or at least lighten their burden. For this category, the slave should exert his utmost and seek the help of Allah. The second category is those affairs over which the slave has no power. For this, the slave should calm himself and accept what came to him and surrender to Allah. There is no doubt that this is a principle complying with which is a definite means of achieving happiness and keeping worry and grief at bay. Chapter 3. 5. Among the greatest means to achieve the expansion of the heart and its tranquility and satisfaction is abundant dhikr, remembrance of Allah. Remembrance of Allah has a wonderful effect of bringing expansion and tranquility to the heart and removing worry and grief. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Ar-Ra'd, chapter 13, verse 28, ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. Without doubt, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find satisfaction. This is because of the special effect that the remembrance of Allah has over the hearts, and the fact that the slave, when remembering Allah, has the hope of receiving a good reward and recompense from Him. 6. Among these things also is proclaiming and mentioning the favors and blessings of Allah on oneself, both the outwardly manifest and the hidden. There is no doubt that recognition of Allah's favors and blessings and speaking about them is a means by which Allah removes the grief and worry from the heart and makes a person thankful to Allah. The station of thankfulness is in itself a station of sublimity and excellence. Whatever the amount of poverty or illness or other forms of tribulations that engulf him, when he compares the limitless and uncountable favors of Allah on him and the unpleasant things that befell him, he sees how extremely small they are in comparison with the blessings of Allah on him. In fact, trials and tribulations are such that when the slave is afflicted with them and he does what is required of him of patience, acceptance and surrender, their oppressive burden becomes light and their pain becomes mild. In addition to that, the hope that the slave has in the reward of Allah and his belief in the fact that he is worshipping Allah by his being patient and accepting what Allah has tried him with, these things sweeten the bitterness of the affliction. So the sweetness of the reward causes him to forget the bitterness of the patience. 7. Among the most useful things in this respect also is working with the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ. In an affirmed hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, انظروا إلى ما هو أسفل منكم ولا تنظروا إلى من هو فوقكم فإنه أجدر أن لا تزدروا نعمة الله عليكم. In the hadith reported by Bukhari and Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, look at those that are below you in worldly positions and don't look at those that are above you in worldly positions. That is more befitting for you not to hold the favors and blessings of Allah on you with contempt. If the slave were to put his noble teaching in front of his eyes, he would realize how far he has been exalted and favored over many people in well-being and exemption from tribulations, in richness and what comes with it, and this is true no matter what his condition is. If he does this, his anxiety will vanish, as well as his grief and worry, and his delight and joy with the favors and blessings of Allah by which he has been placed above many who are lower than him will increase. So far we have mentioned 7 of these means or useful ways of leading a happy life. Inshallah ta'ala, tomorrow we will complete the remaining 3 chapters on the same topic. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive and have mercy upon the Shaykh rahimahullaah, and to make this a beneficial teaching and reminder for all of us. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, I testify that there is no true God worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is Allah's true slave and messenger. We continue the discussion on the useful ways of leading a happy life, written by Shaykh Rahman bin Nasr As-Sa'di, rahimahullaah ta'ala, may Allah's mercy be upon him. And we have reached chapter number 4. He said, rahimahullah ta'ala, among the necessary causes of happiness and cessation of grief and worry is striving to remove the things that bring about grief and acquire those that bring about happiness. This is achieved by forgetting the unpleasant things that have passed, and he has no power to bring them back, and knowing that occupying his mind with them is meaningless. In fact, it is stupidity bordering on lunacy. Therefore, he has to struggle with his mind not to think of them. He should also struggle with his mind not to worry over the future, and not to pay attention to illusions of poverty, fear, or other unpleasant things he is imagining will descend on him in the future. He should know that nobody knows what will happen in the future, whether good or evil, or pleasure or pain. This is in the hands of Allah alone. The slave has no control over it. His only due is to struggle to accomplish what will benefit him in the future and ward off harm from him. He should also know that when the slave turns his mind away from worrying over the future in his affairs and relies on his Lord for its betterment, and is satisfied that his Lord will do that for him, when he does all of that, his heart will be tranquil, and his condition will be good, and his worries and anxieties will vanish. Number 9. Amongst the most beneficial things to do concerning the future of one's affairs is to be saying the prayer, the dua, the invocation that the Prophet ﷺ used to say. Allahumma aslih li dini alladhi huwa ismatu amri. O Allah, make my religion, which is my strength and invisibility, good for me. وأصلح لي دنياي التي فيها معاشي, and make my world wherein is my livelihood good for me. وأصلح لي آخرتي التي إليها معادي, and make my hereafter, which is my final abode, good for me. واجعل الحياة زيادة لي في كل خير, and make my living an increase for me in all that is good. والموت راحة لي من كل شر, and make my death a repose for me from every evil. And also his invocation, the Prophet ﷺ's invocation, Allahumma rahmataka arju. O Allah, it is your mercy that I have hope in. فلا تكلني إلى نفسي طرفة عين, so don't leave me to myself even for the blink of an eye. وأصلح لي شأني كله لا إله إلا أنت, and make good my affairs, all of them. There is no God worthy of being worshipped but you. If the slave says this invocation, which entails seeking the betterment of his future, both in terms of his religion and his worldly affairs, if he says that with a mindful and aware heart and a true and sincere intention, coupled with an earnest struggle to achieve it, Allah will definitely materialize for him what he asked for and had hoped in and struggled to achieve. As a result of this, his worry will change to happiness and delight. Chapter 5. Number 10. Among the most beneficial things that remove worries and anxieties when a calamity befalls a person is for him to struggle to lighten its difficulties by imagining the worst possible thing that would have happened to him and to try to put up with. Then let him physically strive as much as possible to lighten the difficulty. By his striving for what will benefit him and by his effort in putting up with it, his worries and anxieties will vanish, and he will have used his energy in achieving what is beneficial and warding off what is harmful within normal human ability. So, if some dreadful things or illnesses or poverty and deprivation of wants afflict him, he should encounter that with tranquility and try as much as possible to put up with it. In fact, he should prepare himself to put up with something worse. This is because preparing oneself mentally to deal with unpleasant things makes them light and blunts the pangs of their pains. This is especially so when, in addition to that, he physically acts to ward them off. This becomes more meaningful. Or by that he joins together the dual acts of mentally preparing himself to deal with the calamity and the physical effort to ward off the worries, which together serve to engross him away from being troubled and disturbed by the calamity itself. He should also make an earnest effort to replenish his inner energy necessary for encountering these adversities. In addition, to all this, he must absolutely depend on Allah in all circumstances and have sincere trust in Allah. There is no doubt that these things are very helpful in bringing about happiness and satisfaction to the heart. And besides that, there is what he hopes to gain of reward in both this life and the next one. This is well known from experience, and whoever tastes it knows it. Chapter 6.11. Amongst the greatest cures to nervous and mental disorders and even other illnesses of the body is the firmness of the heart and its strength and lack of its being troubled and perturbed by illusions and imaginations brought about by evil thoughts. This is because whenever a person lets imaginations get the better of him and allows his heart to be perturbed by negative effects like fear of illness or anger and confusion over some painful situation or anxiety over something bad happening or over the expected loss of cherished things, whenever he lets that happen, it will surely throw him into the den of grief, sorrow, and physical and mental illness and a nervous breakdown whose terrible effects are well known to all. 12th point. Whenever a person relies and depends on Allah and does not surrender his heart to illusions and does not let evil imaginations get the better of him and puts his trust in Allah and has confidence in his favor, grief and sorrow will vanish from his heart as a result of these actions, and many physical and mental illnesses will leave him, and his heart will experience such joy and tranquility that are beyond expression. How many a hospital is filled with sick people suffering from mental illusions and evil imaginations? How many a strong person have these things shattered their hearts to say nothing of the weak ones. The only one exempted is the one whom Allah has given well-being and guided him to struggle with his self in acquiring useful and beneficial means of strengthening the heart and warding off worries from it. Allah the Most High said, وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And whoever puts his trust on Allah, this is in Surah Al-Talaq 65 verse 3. وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And whoever puts his trust on Allah, sufficient is Allah for him. Sufficient is Allah for him. Meaning that Allah is sufficient for him in all that worries him concerning his religion and his worldly life. A person who puts his trust in Allah has a strong heart that is not affected by illusions nor perturbed by events and occurrences, because he knows that that is from a weak heart and is an act of weakness and fear that has no reality. He also knows that Allah has guaranteed the one who puts his trust in him to suffice him completely. So he is confident in Allah and he feels assured of the promise of Allah, as a result of which his worry and anxiety vanish and his difficulty is replaced by ease, and his sadness by happiness, and his fear by peace and security. We ask Allah to give us well-being and exemption from adversities, and to grant us strength of heart and its firmness in having a true confidence in Him, by which He guarantees those who have it provision of all good and removal of all harm and evil. Chapter 7, point 13. There are two important lessons to learn from the saying of the Prophet ﷺ when he said concerning the wife. He said in the hadith, which is reported by Muslim, لا يفرق مؤمن مؤمنة إن كره منها خلقا رضي منها آخر. A believing man, husband, should not hate a believing woman, wife. If he dislikes one character in her, he will like another one. Two important lessons are to be learned here. The first is, it gives guidance in the way to deal with wives, relations, friends, colleagues, and anyone with whom you have a relationship or association. It teaches that you have to prepare yourself to accept the fact that any person with whom you have one sort of relationship or another will definitely have imperfections, bad qualities, or some character that you would not like. So if you find that in him, think of what is incumbent on you or proper for you to do regarding maintaining the ties of relationship and preserving the bond of love and affection between you. Bring to mind his good qualities and the importance the religion attaches to maintaining good social relations. By overlooking bad qualities and bringing to mind the good ones, bonds of relationship and good companionship are maintained, and this is another source of harmony. The second lesson is that it teaches us how to ward off grief and worry and bring about an honest and sincere relationship in which each party fulfills his obligations and dues to the other, and harmony is maintained between them. The one who does not work with his teaching or with this teaching of the Prophet ﷺ and does the opposite, whereby he busies himself with noticing the bad qualities and ignoring the good ones, there is no doubt that he will be overtaken by worries and anxieties, and there is no doubt also that the bond of love that is between him and those he loves will be cut, and many of the rights and obligations of both parties will be floated. Many people with high aspirations and inner energy are able to prepare themselves to deal with heavy calamities and adversities with patience and tranquility. But when they are faced with small and trivial issues, they become worried and anxious, and their hearts lose their clarity of thought and become turbid. The reason behind this is that they were able to prepare themselves to deal with major situations, and they ignored the minor ones, and as a result of which the things they regarded as insignificant took them off their guard and unsettled their peace. The real strong person prepares himself to deal with both great and insignificant issues and asks the help of Allah in that, and that Allah does not leave him to himself even for the blink of an eye. When he does that, the small issues become easy for him to handle just as the big ones, and he maintains his composure, happiness and tranquility. Chapter 8. Point 14. The intelligent person knows that his real life, in the life he lives in happiness and tranquility, and that it is very short indeed. Therefore, he should not make it shorter. He should not make it shorter by allowing grief and mourning over troubles to get the better of him, because that is the opposite of real living. He should be very covetous of his life, so that most of it does not become the loot of worries and troubles. And in this there is no difference between both the good and the bad people, except that the believer has a more complete and perfect realization of this fact and makes better use of it for the good of both this world and the hereafter. 15th point. When something unpleasant happens to him, or he is afraid that it will happen to him, he should remember the other blessings of Allah on him in his religion and worldly life, and compare them with the unpleasant thing. If he does that, he will realize how abundant are the blessings of Allah on him, and how insignificant are the troubles that befell him. He should also compare between his fear in the evil that may possibly befall him, and the many other possibilities of safety and deliverance from that evil that may occur. Therefore, he should not let a weak and insignificant possibility outweigh stronger and more numerous possibilities. By this, his fear and anxiety will fade away. He should also assume the occurrence of the worst possible trouble on him, and then prepare himself to deal with it if it occurs, and strive as much as possible to ward it off if it has not occurred, or remove or lighten it if it has occurred. 16th point. Among the useful things to remember is to know that what people do to hurt you, especially slander and other evil talk, will not hurt you. Rather, it is them that it hurts. The only way it will hurt you is when you occupy yourself with grieving over it and allow it to get the better of your feelings. When you do that, it will hurt you as it did hurt them. But if you pay no attention of it, it will not hurt you in any way. 17th point. Know also that your life is subservient to your thoughts. If you engage your thoughts in what is useful to you in your religion and your worldly life, then your life will be good and happy. Otherwise, the opposite will be the case. 18th point. Among the most useful ways to drive away grief is to train yourself not to desire thanks and gratitude from anyone except Allah. So if you do good to someone who has a right over you or has no right over you, then know that your deal is with Allah, and don't pay any heed to the thanks and gratitude of the one to whom you were good. This is as Allah the Most High said regarding His elite among creation, as in Surah Al-Insan, verse 9, 76, verse 9, إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. They say, we feed you for the sake of Allah alone. No reward do we desire from you, nor thanks. This is more important when dealing with the family, children, or any other person strongly connected to you. Whenever you make it your habit to drive away evil from them, you rest in peace, and make others also rest in peace. Among the things that make life easy for you is to follow a natural path in your effort to do righteous and excellent actions, and avoid constraining yourself to follow an unnatural path that will fill your heart with worries and anxieties, and you end up going nowhere in attaining the excellent positions. This is because you followed a crooked path. All this is wisdom. Also make use of the moments of turbidity and turn them to moments of sweetness and clarity. By that, the sweetness of your pleasures will increase and your troubles will vanish. 19th point. Make the attainment of useful things your goal and strive to realize them, and pay no attention to harmful things. This will occupy you away from the things that bring about grief and sorrow. Seize moments of leisure and mental concentration to accomplish important activities. 20. Among the useful things to do is on-the-spot accomplishment of your activities, so that the future may be free for you. This is because if you don't finish your present activities at once, others will come and pile themselves upon you, and they will join forces to oppress you. But if you accomplish each activity in its time, future activities will find you prepared and strong physically and mentally. 21. When undertaking useful things, you should rank them in order of priority and importance. Find out the one which you have a stronger urge to do, and which yourself desires more. Its opposite will bring about boredom, weariness, and irritation. Seek help in good thinking and good counsel. It is said that the one who seeks good counsel never regrets. Study what you intend to do carefully and thoroughly. When you are certain of the good that is in it and resolve to do it, then rely on Allah, and know that Allah loves those who rely on Him. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. And may the peace and blessings of Allah be on our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his family and the companions. And also we say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His mercy and forgiveness be bestowed upon the Shaykh Rahman ibn Nasr As-Sa'di rahimahullaah ta'ala for this excellent treatise and benefits in it. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. This brings the end of this treatise, the useful ways of leading happy life, on this night, the night of the 15th of Dhul Hijjah, corresponding to the night of January 25th, 2005. والحمد لله الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات.